Welcome to Mystical Tutor. Our journey on the road to judging takes us to permanents, cards, states, and zones today. Permanents are cards or tokens on the battlefield. There are 5 different types of permanents: creatures, lands, artifacts, enchantments, and planeswalkers. A permanent can have more than one type, such as artifact land or enchantment creature. Permanents can have supertypes or subtypes that augment the card type. These cannot stand alone. Some examples of supertypes are legendary, basic, and token. Different types of permanents have their own set of subtypes. Creatures have subtypes such as human, vampire, bird, and kraken. Lands have subtypes such as mountain, forest, urzas, and gate. Artifacts usually have the subtype equipment, while enchantments have subtypes such as aura and curse. Another kind of permanent is a token. Tokens are markers that represent any permanent that is not represented by a card. We usually think of tokens as creatures. However, this is not always the case, such as a landmine token created by Goblin Kaboomist, or a gold token created by Guild. Other objects that are not permanents include emblems and spells on the stack, including instants and sorceries. Permanents have a status, which is its physical state. There are 4 status categories, each of which have 2 possible values: tapped or untapped, face up or face down, flipped or unflipped, and phased in or phased out. Permanents always have one of the values of each of the statuses. Permanents enter the battlefield by default untapped, face up, unflipped, and phased in. A permanent status is not a characteristic, though it may affect a permanent's characteristics. Transform is not a status of a permanent, as not all cards can be transformed. If a non-double-face card attempts to transform, it will fail. Double-face cards also have no face-down side, though they can be face-down due to manifest. Zones are areas in the game of Magic. They are places where objects can be, and they assist players in keeping cards and concepts separate. Zones can be public or hidden, and there are 8 zones in total. There are 2 private zones, which not all players can be expected to see the cards' faces: the library and the hand. A player's library is their deck, which is kept in a single face-down pile. If an effect puts 2 or more cards on either the top or bottom of a library at the same time, the owner may arrange those cards in any order and does not reveal the order to the other players. Some effects reveal the top card of a library, or allow a player to look at the top card of a library. If the top card changes during the casting of the spell, then the top of the library will not be revealed, and cannot be looked at until the spell is cast. A player's hand is the primary source of cards they can play. Each player has a maximum hand size, which is usually 7, and has to discard at the end of the turn if they have more than the maximum. The other 6 zones are all public zones, meaning they are shared by both players, and they both are entitled access to view the objects in the zones. The graveyard is a player's discard pile, which is kept in a single face-up pile. When an object is countered, discarded, destroyed, or sacrificed, it is placed in its owner's graveyard. Additionally, instant and sorcery spells move to the graveyard at the end of their resolution. While players can examine cards in any graveyard, they normally cannot change the order of the cards. There are additional rules for DCI-sanctioned tournaments that may allow a player to change the order of their graveyard. Similar to the library, if 2 or more cards are placed into a graveyard at the same time, they may be rearranged in any order. The battlefield is where all permanents reside. While there is no set method for organizing permanents, it is important to not hide any information from an opponent. The stack is a zone where all spells go when they are cast, and where abilities are placed when they are activated or triggered. For spells, the physical card is placed on the stack. For abilities, they are placed on the stack with no physical representation. Some abilities and actions do not use the stack, such as mana abilities, state-based actions, special actions, static abilities, and turn-based actions. More information on the stack will be covered in the subsequent lesson. The Exile zone is a holding area for objects. Some spells and abilities send objects to exile permanently, while other spells and abilities exile objects temporarily. Cards in the Exile zone are face-up by default and can be viewed by any player. Certain spells or abilities exile cards face down, and they may not be examined by any player except when instructions allow it. The Command Zone is a game area reserved for certain objects that have an overarching effect on the game, but they are not permanent and cannot be destroyed. In certain casual variants, such as Planner Magic, Vanguard, EDH, and Arch Enemy, non-traditional magic cards, or specially designated cards, start the game in the Command Zone. Each variant has its own rules regarding these cards. The final zone is the Ante zone, but we will not worry about this zone. Cards with certain card types cannot enter certain zones. If an instant or sorcery card tries to enter the battlefield, it stays in the previous zone. If a plain, Vanguard, or Scheme card would leave the Command Zone, it stays in the Command Zone. If an object moves from one zone to another, it is a new object that has no memory or relation to its previous form. However, there are some exceptions. If the characteristics of a permanent spell are changed by an effect, then it will still be applied to the permanent the spell becomes. Any damage prevention effects on a permanent spell are continued to be applied to the permanent the spell becomes. If an ability on a permanent requires information about choices made as the permanent was cast as a spell, it uses the information about the spell. If an ability triggers when an object changes zones, it can find the new object in the zone where the ability triggered, if the zone is public. Abilities of auras that trigger when the enchanted permanent leaves the battlefield can find the new object that aura became in its owner's graveyard, if it was put into that graveyard at the same time the enchanted permanent left the battlefield. It can also find the new object that aura became in its owner's graveyard as a result of being put there as a state-based action for not being attached to a permanent. If an effect grants a non-land card an ability that allows it to be cast, the ability will continue to apply to the new object that card became after it moved to the stack as a result of being cast this way. This concludes today's Mystical Tutor. We hope to see you next time.